So diving right in, if you've joined us before, this is where you normally see an agenda slide. Today we're going to be walking through the infographic that we just produced as our premium content offer for April. So we don't have an agenda, we're just going to walk through that. So if you want to follow along, slides are available on the right-hand side in the handouts panel. You can also download our infographic and how-to guide that walks through that as well. All of those are available for free in that handouts panel. If you want additional printable sizes of those infographics, they are available. I just couldn't upload them to the GoToWebinar. So feel free to email me at kanthony@myrounding.com, and I'll be happy to send those to you. Again, that's kanthony@myrounding.com. So giving you an overview of who's on the call with you today, my name is Katie Anthony. I'm the marketing coordinator here at MyRounding, and I'll be your host for today. I'm joined by Michael Niederhauser and Steve Baxel. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, Katie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be presenting with my expert colleague, Steve Baxel. And I've been here at MyRounding for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was working on some health initiatives in rural Colorado to extend patient information out to people in need. But really thrilled to be here and talk about this effort in Nurse Leader Rounding, Steve.
And hi, everyone. My name is Steve Baxel. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for MyRounding. And I've been at it for almost 20 years now, consulting with health systems and hospitals. And I really am passionate about organizational behavior. So rounding is just one of my favorite things to talk about. I think it really does have a huge impact on culture in an organization, and I enjoy seeing that.
Great. Welcome both, and thank you both for joining us. So now that you know who we are, we just wanted to get a sense about who you are, who's on the line with us. So if you wouldn't mind, there's a poll that pops up on the screen here. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, just take a few seconds here. All right, looks like we're starting to weigh in here. We have a few executive leaders. We also have the large majority are non-staff or consultants on the line. So that's really, really good to see who's on the line so that we can just kind of customize our presentation a little bit to all of you. So it looks like there's still a few people here that are filling this out. So I'll give you a few more seconds. If you haven't already, please go ahead and tell us who you are. All right, great. So thank you for those of you who weighed in here. It looks like we have about 50% executive leadership and about 50% of that non-staff or consultant role. So let's keep going.
So this is the overview of the graphic, and Katie and I were working, this is Steve by the way, Katie and I were working several weeks ago and thought it would be really neat to be able to create some sort of tool that might be helpful for both our customers and non-customers to be able to post perhaps in a nursing unit to give you a quick overview of some of the best practices around rounding. It's been overwhelming, just lots and lots of downloads. So as Katie said, these are available in printable sizes, poster sizes if you'd like to get those, so please reach out to Katie. And also we'd be happy to send you a copy. If you'd like us to roll one up, put one in a tube and send it to you, please let us know.
Steve, the other thing that I really like about this is it's based on a methodology that we're all quite familiar with, which is ADET. The reason why I like this is it uses some little bit different terminology that I think has a connection to many of our nurse leaders. So realize we're reinforcing a proven behavior, but trying to improve upon it and create a little bit more relativity to the teams out there.
And just to make sure, just in case there is somebody on the line, ADET, of course, is the Studer Group philosophy that is acknowledge, introduction, duration, explain, and then thank. So we'll mention that as we go through the list. It's still a great methodology, and we're trying to connect it here. We are also sister companies with the Studer Group, so of course we should definitely be practicing what we preach.
Absolutely.
So why don't we jump in right here at the top. The first step, of course, is the coach-in and prep. Now, this is not part of ADET. It's something it's something that we added to the list because we think it's so incredibly important. Michael, why is it important to coach in before we head out to do a round?
Steve, there's two main things here really that we're trying to address in coaching in. First of all, I'm setting the expectation with my team that I'm going to be rounding on their patients. That expectation should let them know this is going to happen on a regular interval, and I'm going to be making sure that our patients are getting the care that they deserve.
And that regular interval, I know a lot of times we meet organizations, we're at the front end of an initiative.
Yes.
And that initiative needs momentum and it needs to sustain.
That's right.
And I think that a big part of that sustaining is that regular interval and you setting the expectation that this isn't just a flash in the pan. This is going to happen every day just the same way.
That's right. I mean, it's accountability. If I know someone is going to go check on my work, I'm going to make sure it's all done. And so that regularity is really important. The second component that I think is extremely valuable is it sets me up as a nurse leader to understand what I'm walking into. I can get an understanding of what service recovery items are currently out there, get an idea of how a patient's doing with their family, even get an idea if a patient isn't timed right now for a round. They might be sleeping. I don't want to wake that patient if I don't have to. So it just sets the stage for success for my rounding as well. Now, this also bookends a process that we'll get back to at the very end, which is coaching out and really reviewing what we've learned. So great bookends to this process of rounding.
So Michael, sometimes we do get some pushback in this area. I already don't have the time to round. Now I've got to go track down a primary nurse. Do I just skip the round if I can't find the primary nurse? What am I supposed to do as a nurse leader about to go out and do a round?
We will always coach for you to find that primary nurse if possible. Now, it's not always possible. They might be with another patient. And certainly what we would ask that you do is check in quickly at the nurse station to see if you can glean any information, because having a little bit of information before heading in is worth volumes when you're there. So continue on with your round. Still go to lengths at the end to coach out. But if you're setting expectations, this is going to happen over time. It's not as critical to check in every time.
So the second step in our graphic is knock and introduce. This pretty much lines up with the A and AIDIT from the Studer group. And the first one right there is knock and then wait for a response. Now, not everybody does this really well. Why are we waiting for a response?
Well, the biggest thing I think is that when you think of a patient, most of our patients now are in private rooms. It's their space. If we just walk into it, it creates a little bit of anxiety for that patient. If we take the time to knock on the door and wait until we're welcomed into the room, that's an entirely different engaged experience than, here I am coming around on you. And we want to make sure that we start off with that inviting into the room for that stage.
Yeah, and I've been on the receiving end of a round like that where the nurse does come in, the knock happens as they're walking through the door. It honestly makes you look rushed. And even if you are rushed, we're trying very hard not to look that way. So it's good for the wait. The next one, of course, is demonstrating hand hygiene. So hand hygiene is important. How am I demonstrating it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Steve. We all know hand hygiene is mandatory. We also all know that it's not 100% in compliance. So there's two reasons for this, I believe. One is to model that behavior for every single staff that is on the unit. This is not optional. This is mandatory, and I'm going to do this every single time. The other reason is that a patient may not be aware of hand sanitizer and how that works in our overall hand washing protocols. And so one part modeling, one part education, just do a little bit more dramatic washing of hands and perhaps even explain to the patient that you're using hand sanitizer to keep them safe, the rest of our patients safe, and the entire team safe.
You know, it's that explaining the process piece that goes a really long way. And I think about it pretty much in any interaction that I have as a customer.
Yeah.
If you're explaining to me what's happening while I'm waiting or what's happening while this is going on, it really kind of includes me in this interaction.
It does.
The next one is greeting the family or the patient by name.
Yeah.
So incredibly important.
Yep.
And then there's the introduce, duration, and explain. Duration always hangs me up a little bit. Why is it important for us to talk about how long this is going to take?
Yeah, I mentioned anxiety earlier when going into a patient's room. And if you think about a patient, they don't have a whole lot of understanding of what's happening and when in the sequence of events. So if we can reduce any of those variables, that's going to lower their levels of anxiety and make them feel better and ultimately get better quicker. So if we're talking about duration of round, we're going to set the expectation, help them to understand what we're doing and why. but we're also setting the stage for how long we're going to spend with that patient. And so unfortunately don't have 2 hours to sit with you and chat with you about all these things, although I'd love to. I've got about 5 to 10 minutes. And in that 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to hear from you what's important to you and what we can do to take the greatest care of you possible.
Now, I've actually seen this backfire on a nurse leader that I was out rounding with. And when we went in, she wanted to get across the fact that this wasn't going to take very long.
Sure.
So she used words like, we're going to be very quick today. It's only going to take a couple minutes. I just have to ask some real fast questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. So while her intention was to talk about this is not going to take very much of your time, the impact was she seemed rushed.
Sure.
So we need to be careful. We're not trying to talk about how fast we're going to go. We're talking about we need to take 10 minutes and really have a meaningful conversation.
That's right.
As part of this round.
Yep. Great example.
All right. So our next one is sitting and rounding. It's not shooting red lasers out of your eyes. The commit to sit component. Now, many of you have probably already heard commit to sit. Why is sitting down so important?
There's so much evidence out there, Steve, about the benefits of sitting with regards to patient experience and rounding. It helps you to be a more effective listener, and it also increases the perceived length of time that we're spending with our patients. So doing nothing else besides sitting in your rounding efforts can make a real impact on patient experience scores.
So I walked into a small room. It was in a hospital in San Francisco, and the room was really tough to sit down in. They had that big heavy chair in the corner that you couldn't move, that the tray was in the way, the windowsill was covered in stuff. So I saw the nurse leader walk out of the room. She grabbed a stool and carried it back into the room just to make sure she could sit.
Excellent.
So from there, making eye contact and personal touch. So let's start with eye contact. We just recently read a study, a pretty recent study about what eye contact does to the patient's perception of care.
Yeah, it was really interesting. We learned that for shorter engagements, having eye contact had a really large impact on the overall engagement of that individual. It created a connection and held it. Now, we're not saying gaze longingly into each other's eyes for minutes at a time, but when you first make that connection, eye contact is so critical for that. For longer conversations, the amount of eye contact actually diminishes in its overall value. But again, for these short interactions, eye contact really engages and develops some trust.
So I watched, talking about touch now, I actually got to watch a scene where just a gentle touch on an elbow completely diffused a situation. What did we learn about personal touch?
Personal touch is really an interesting topic. I dare say touchy. Yes, right. I'll save the rest for later. In full honesty, though, we shake hands. Personal touch is a part of all of our lives all the time. Some people are very comfortable with personal touch, while others may not be. And what we say is use your instinct. If you know you as a person are not comfortable with personal touch, don't put yourself in the situation where you're uncomfortable, because the patient will feel that.
And if you're uncomfortable with personal touch, you're probably going to do it wrong.
Right, exactly, Steve. And so for those of us that are a little bit more comfortable, you have incredible intuition. Feel out a situation. You can tell when you're sitting down, if reaching for that hand and a pat on the hand is appropriate, do it. It really does make a connection possible there and builds trust as well.
So these are the interpersonal components of the interaction. Now we want to inject some technology into this interaction. What's a good way to do that?
I think transparency. I'm using this technology here because what you say is extremely important to me. And I want to take this information down. And if we need to act on it, I want to make sure it gets done for you. Showing them the technology is valuable. It's not a black box. It's not a mystery. We really just want to take great care of you. And this is one way that we do it.
Yeah, and when I've seen this done, sometimes that first time out, I see nurses try to hide the technology or try to pretend like it's not there or hold it low and touch it down here on the side.
Yeah.
It's really important to turn it around, show it to the person.
Yeah.
Maybe, fill it out with them. It really makes it part of the process.
Yeah.
So making the rounding questions part of the conversation, those first couple rounds are probably going to be a little clunky.
Yep.
Because you're trying to maybe follow the script, but you really have to adopt that as your own. We need to practice it.
It's true. And really, regardless if you're using technology or otherwise, practicing if you're going to be rounding with staff or even with patients in this case is going to get you the foundation and the confidence to understand how to navigate the questions and how to use the technology as well. So you might have an understanding of what your 5 key topic areas are, and you're going to have a conversation with the patient. If you can get to 3 of those 5 and you have a fantastic conversation in 5 to 10 minutes, that's a win. Don't spend more time and feel like you have to force your way down the checklist. It's all about that conversation. Afterwards, I might have a moment and reflect, I didn't get a chance to talk about plan of care. I'm going to make sure to focus on that with the next patient, but it's all about that conversation. Steve, I found out you love pink flamingos. That's going to be more valuable to me and probably to your stay value as we move forward.
All right, do you see what I just did there? Did you get it?
I think you must have taken a moment to breathe.
I did. I took a moment to breathe, and it's really, really important. Our team just went out and did some improvisational practice, and I think the one thing that we took out of it was the importance of breath.
Yeah.
And, you get to the end of this round, or you think you've gotten to the end of this round, but you just want to double check. Taking a moment, a little pause, really opens up the opportunity for the patient to say something more, or to make sure that you kind of gathered your thoughts and you've covered everything you wanted to cover.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great tip.
All right. So this one is probably one of my favorites. And again, we are actually moving a little bit away from the ADED because we just talked about duration and explanation. But now we want to talk about confirm, because I do think this is a really important component of the round. And it kind of goes along with breathing as well. We breathe, let the patient tell us a little bit more. What does the confirming look like?
Yeah, so confirming really is all around the fact that if we are reading back an opportunity or a problem to the patient, we're doing a couple of things. We're showing the patient that we are listening and actively thinking and concerned about you, but we're also reinforcing and really validating that we understand the problem or opportunity at hand. I found about a quarter of the time when I read things back to people, I'm not quite there. Either I've missed something or there's a little something extra that has come up. And by reading back, you're providing that space and that opportunity to show you care and to make sure that you're about to head off and solve the problem that is actually the problem.
Yeah, and this is a great example of a script. I heard you say this. And a lot of times when we repeat that back, they'll want to fill in some of those blanks. And a lot of times that second go around is where you really get the good information.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on now. We have been collecting information. We've been engaged. We're reading back information to our patients. How do we go about capturing this information in a meaningful way?
So, Michael, the first bullet point there is ask open-ended questions. A lot of times when we start out on an initiative, the organization that we're working with wants to ask 5 very specific questions about the things they care about.
Right.
It's nurse communication. It's how quickly did we come and answer the call bell.
Sure.
These are all focused on the organization. They're not necessarily focused on the patient. So an open-ended question that I really like right out of the gate is, what is your primary concern today? What should we be working on? It's very patient-focused, and it allows us to draw out that one thing that's going to be most important for the patient today.
Nice. That's a good way to start things out. The next item we have here is not really relating directly to the patient. It's about recognition. Who are we recognizing and why is it important?
Recognition is a really fun conversation to have because it does a number of things. Hopefully we're already managing up our staff. So we're talking about you've got a great doctor, you've got a great nurse working with you today. I really like Katie. However, the recognition piece allows us to capture that from the patient's perspective. So we had a really neat example of this where an organization was collecting recognitions, and we all knew this guy named Bill. Bill was a gregarious guy. He was an extrovert. He was in all of our phone calls, so we all knew him, and we all liked him. He was a likable guy.
Sure.
However, when we got our recognition results back at the end of the month, there was another name that was really at the forefront of recognition, and it was Maria. And it turns out that Maria is not that gregarious person. She's not that extrovert, but the patients absolutely loved her. Yeah. So we were able to recognize Maria. And the fun part of the tool, if you're using this technology, is that you can capture that recognition, give it at the same time that it actually happens, and give that staff member a little boost in their day that someone someplace else is talking about them in a positive way.
Huh, nice. Well, Of course, we're going to find out about some potential opportunities, areas for improvement, service recovery, et cetera. What are your thoughts around tracking these sorts of issues?
So this is probably in the top 3 reasons why an organization might choose a technology to help them with this, is that in the old days, if you had an issue, if there was a service recovery, you'd have to go find a person, you have to tell them about it, maybe or maybe not, they'd follow up with you and tell you that they took care of it. So we're trying to capture that information in the tool right away, identify what that issue is, and then assign it to someone and hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And when they're being held accountable, when they've taken care of the problem, they can close the loop. They can close it out and say, this is how I took care of that issue. It all happens in real time. We actually saw this with a patient who said that they were having a problem with their food during the round. We created the issue during the round, sent it down to nutritional services. And then before the round was even done, nutritional services were up with a brand new tray, and we hadn't even finished yet.
Wow, that's powerful. You know, the other thing that I often see a lot are some of those issues that might come up around hourly nurse rounding behaviors. What's your thoughts on, you know, I'm a nurse leader, nurse manager, you know, the bed alarm's not on. What should I do? Should I just correct it and move on?
Yeah, in that case, and then the bed alarm, maybe you could take care of it relatively quickly, but for some issues, you need to be able to delegate things. So back to that nurse leader who didn't have the time to go around, the hope here is that you're going to identify some of these things that maybe you are taking care of all day that you could perhaps delegate. So hopefully the issue tool allows you some more time in your day because you're delegating a lot of the issues that you used to just firefight.
Right. It reminds me of the old saying, what you permit, you promote. If I'm updating whiteboards and not closing the loop back with that primary nurse, you know, they're not going to change their behavior. Right.
So true. And at the very end, we've got that last bit of the AIDIT model, which is thanking.
Yeah, I'd certainly say that this is more than a simple thank you. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different reasons to be grateful for this patient or their family having spent some time with us. One of them, of course, is that perhaps they chose us for care. They have options for where they go for care. So this is pretty important to be grateful. It's also important to ask for if we've covered everything, if there's anything you need before leaving. And if you know human nature, sometimes you have to ask this question twice. Is there anything else you need? And a lot of times the first answer is going to be, no, don't worry about it. But it's kind of like being at the restaurant where you don't need anything, and then the minute they've left, you realize there's no ketchup and your water's empty.
Yeah.
Ask again, are you sure that you've got everything that you need? I've got the time.
Nice. Nice. Of course, demonstrating hand hygiene on the way out as well, equally important. One additional thing that I've seen is a really nice kind of icing on the cake for thanking people is leaving behind a business card. If you need anything else, you know, please reach out to me. It's important that we're taking the best care possible.
Yeah, and when we've looked at studies around rounding with every patient every day, it's a leader who's doing the rounding that drives HCAHPS. And the fact that you've left that business card, it tells them, look, I'm someone with some authority here at the organization, and I took my time to meet with you. It can have a really big impact, especially when we're talking about HCAHPS.
Yeah. Well, this is the final bookend, Steve. We have left the journey of AIDET, and here we are coaching out. What's it all about?
Right. So coaching out is incredibly important as well. This is your opportunity to meet with your staff and do some of that coaching that probably otherwise doesn't happen because you're so busy. And of course, there's a good way to do this. Where should we start?
Always start out with the positive. Recognition and what's working well, specifically around those patients that I have just visited directly relating to this person. So, you know, we want to highlight all the great things. Every single one of your patients were able to explain their plan of care. We know how important that is, and you've just done a wonderful job. Susie in 202 said that she literally is in love with you. How awesome is that?
Right. So then the next part, of course, is identifying those opportunities for improvement and doing the real coaching.
Sure.
One of the things, I mean, even I struggle with this because you a lot of times just want to launch into, this is what you got to do better. This is what needs to happen next time.
Yeah.
But instead, there's a better way to go about that, and it's through questioning.
It is. And so, you know, I may have noticed as a nurse leader that there were problems on the whiteboard. One way that I can help bring a person along is say, tell me about how you're using the whiteboard to communicate with patients. You know, I have very specific information that's missing on that whiteboard, you know, pain, maybe an hourly rounding check-in. I'm going to let them go through the process of exploring what's working for them and hopefully help them to come up with their own solution. We all know that if we come up with a solution, we're much more likely to follow through than if someone mandates it.
Yeah, I think leadership through questioning is so important. I think I need to have tattooed on my hand, tell me about how.
Yes.
I need to start every conversation that way.
Yeah, yep. Very powerful tips here.
All right. I think that is the entire infographic, and now we would love to hear some questions from the group. If you happen to have typed some questions, if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, whether it's our experience out there in the field, shadowing, rounding with organizations and some of the best practices we've seen, or even if you'd like to share a best practice with the group, please type it in the sidebar. We'd be happy to read it to the group and talk about it.
Great. Well, thank you both, Michael and Steve, for joining us today. While you guys are typing in your questions here, I wanted to go over just a couple of housekeeping items. So first off, thank you all for joining us today. It really means a lot to us that you've taken some time out of your day and are learning and trying to improve this process. If you have any additional questions after we sign off here, feel free to email us at info@myrounding.com, and that will get back to both Steve and Michael, and we can find the answer for you. We'll hunt it down. We'll make sure that you get an answer. A recording of this presentation will be available. It'll be posted to our website either today or tomorrow, and I will send you a link in the follow-up email. So be on the lookout for that and make sure that you look for that, find it, watch it again, share it. Also, when you close this window, you will see a short survey pop up. These are just really high-level, quick questions just to get a sense of what we're doing well, what we can improve upon, and how we can improve your experience in future webinars. So this is really important to us, so we really appreciate any feedback that you're able to provide us. Finally, I just want to remind you to check our website regularly. That's myrounding.com for new ebooks, webinars, infographics, and resources. We're constantly trying to put these out for you to provide you the resources that you need. We know that resources are kind of hard to come by sometimes, especially quality ones. So we are trying to provide that to you at least monthly. And we do have a new guide that's coming out in a couple of weeks on rounding questions, so be on the lookout for that. And with that, it looks like we do have a couple of questions that have come in. So let me dive on in here. We've talked a little bit about some of this, so the rounding technology being a barrier, but this person says that they have somebody who's really struggling within using technology. So how do you help coach them and get them over that barrier?
Well, I personally would argue that the round itself is a more likely barrier than the technology. And I would make time to validate their rounding behaviors first without the technology. Let's go through the process. Let's get comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Were they a good rounder before?
Right. And so once we get that baseline, then we can introduce the technology and make the parallels between what made the round really a positive round, which had nothing to do with the technology. It had to do with sitting down, eye contact, the personal touch, etc. When we have technology there, it doesn't add anything else. It's the same principles. So I would go back to the basics in every single one of those instances.
Yeah, and I think practicing is also a really big deal. Do some role playing, even on a daily basis for a while. Maybe they just need to be really practiced. Some of us are good at seat of our pants.
Yeah.
Others really want to practice many times before they go in.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that many different hospitals are using validation practices as well as creating a time and space to actually practice these rounding behaviors. I think those entities that are most successful have a very clear process for nurse leader rounding best practices when we have new nurse leaders, as well as a practice to validate behaviors in an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you for that. All right, the next question here is, and we've touched on this a little bit, but if you could just dive into it a little bit more. We don't have anywhere to sit in the patient room, so is there an alternative to sitting that's still as powerful, or?
So, in my experience, and my wife is in education and she works with kids, and every time we meet somebody who's, 4 feet or under, she goes straight down to her knees, so she's eye level with the child and is able to see them eye to eye. So I think a lot of times you'll see me kind of doing a half a squat. Anything to get eye level is really, really important. I think it's a good point.
We had one particular customer that actually went out and purchased those little tri-legged stools. They fold up and you can kind of carry it really easily. And they bought those and actually made those available around a nurse station so that a nurse leader could pick one of those up, stroll into a room, and always have a place to sit. That also works really well in emergency departments where things are moving around very quickly.
You just don't want to be hovering over or towering over somebody.
Right.
You need to get down to eye level.
Right.
Super intimidating. All right, great. This is a big issue. Where do I find the time to round?
Finding the time to round. A lot of times in a lot of the organizations that I've worked with, they'll schedule it as a slot in their day. It just becomes a regular time in their day. And what they find and what we've talked about is sometimes you are able to head off things during the round that were kind of a time suck previously in your day because you're taking care of it during that regular round.
Yeah, I think that the key thing is to make a habit out of it. And so in some units, it's possible to do it at the same time every day. Other units, it's just not possible, but you can do it at relative times. You know, just after certain med rounds, as an example, or just before I check my email in the morning. Whatever you can do to really make that process a habit is what's going to make it sustainable.
Great advice. All right, here's another question about what questions should I be asking in a patient round, and how many?
I definitely have opinions. I think shorter is better. I really do like that open-ended, tell me what your primary concern is today.
Yeah.
I definitely would like a couple of questions that were metrics-based, something yes or no, or a 1 to 5 or a scaled question. I want to be able to trend line something so I can go back to my boss and say, hey, look at how things are improving over time.
Sure.
So something metrics-based, but definitely open-ended. Primary concerns, probably my favorite because I think it can envelop so many things that are important to the patient.
Yeah.
If I can say one last thing, the other ruler that I use is let's make sure that it's not a burden to the patient.
Sure.
The patient should not be, is the nurse coming on time? Is the whiteboard up to date? The patient shouldn't have to be concerned about those things. Those are audits that a nurse can do.
Right. Yeah, it's an important point. I mean, I think in our upcoming content offerings, we'll be exploring these in further detail as well.
Great. All right. It looks like we've covered most of the questions here. I'm just doing a quick scan through, make sure we didn't miss any. I think that pretty much answers all the questions that have been asked. So thank you everybody who's on the line for taking the time out of your day and joining us and asking such great questions, being engaged. Also, Steve and Michael, thank you again for joining us and presenting this valuable material.
It's a pleasure.
We hope that everybody on the line will join us for a future webinar and also be looking for that next premium content offer that we're going to be producing within the next couple of weeks about those questions that you should be asking within a round. So with that, we're going to sign off. I hope that everybody has a great day. Thanks again for joining us.